The Counter-Reformation was a movement within the Roman Catholic Church in the 16th and 17th centuries that tried to eliminate abuses within the Church and to respond to the Protestant Reformation. Protestant challenge was a dominant theme of contemporary Catholicism. So the movement is also labeled as Catholic Reformation or Catholic Renaissance.
From within Catholicism, we find efforts from a very ancient time to purge the various abuses and the ills that had beset the Catholic Church. Before 1517, the reformation of abuses preoccupied dedicated clerics and laymen in every country of Europe, which became in the 1530s a vast movement of spiritual, moral and ecclesiastical renewal, independent of Protestantism, but not always in opposition to it.
The two Reformations, Protestant and Catholic, though believing themselves to be in opposition, had many similarities and drew on a common past.
The movement is called the Catholic Reformation, and this culminated in the mid-centuries in the decrees of the Council of Trent. For example, the jurisdiction of the church government was rationalized, eliminating chaos in ecclesiastical appointments and improving the discipline and education of priests and monks. Such reforms helped to revitalize the existing church or the Catholic Church.
The century before the outbreak of Reformation was marked by increasing and widespread dismay with the venality of the bishops and their involvement in politics, with the ignorance and superstition of the lower clergy, with the laxity of religious orders, and with the sterility of academic theology. Now, most often than not, we would find that the parish priest was illiterate, was someone who could not conduct the services of the church in accordance with the Christian tenets because he did not have the necessary education and the training to do so. And this was one of the major flaws of the existing Christianity of that time, which the Council of Trent tried to redress. Movements had begun for a return to original observances within the religious order. Girolamo Savonarola and others were outspoken critics of the papacy. When Paul III became the Pope in 1534, the Roman Catholic Church received the leadership it needed to coordinate these impulses and meet the challenges of the Protestants. Many Catholics made spiritual journeys which were as complex and dramatic as Luther's, but they reached different ends. The Catholic Reformation is sometimes described as a Spanish movement. Over 3,000 mystical works are known to have been written in 16th century Spain. The dominant Spanish mystics were Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and Ignatius of Loyola. Men and women who
who had undergone a long, wrenching series of experiences, including terrible pain and terrible ecstasies. And finally, they were united with divinity. And this was the feeling which, according to them, could not be a feeling which just could not be shared with the others. One had to experience that to realize what it meant to be, to come face to face with divinity. Mystics enjoyed vast prestige in the 15th and 16th century, and many like Ignatius Loyola applied their pure convictions and vast energies to everything from founding religious orders to caring for the poor.
Ignatius Loyola was a soldier who sought to create a new religious order. He fused the best of the Reformist tradition of the Renaissance with a reformed Catholicism. Founded in 1534 and sanctioned by the Pope in 1540, the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, formed the backbone of the Catholic Reformation.
I think the Society of Jesus played a very important role. And I think this congregation, first of all, previously we had the classic religious congregation orders, like the Franciscan, the Dominicans, and the Augustinians, and these are the ones who established great universities, those orders are basically Benedictines. Those are basically monastic orders, very much a secluded life, so to say, set apart from the world like. Okay. Now, the speciality of this charism of the Jesuits is that these are men who chose to live in the world, not cut off from the world. So it is not a monastic order, but it is a religious order in the heart of the society. And I think that was the need of the hour.
The Jesuits combined the ideals of the traditional monastic discipline with a dedication to teaching and preaching. As a brotherhood or society, the Jesuits sought to bypass local corruption and appealed to the papacy to leading international movement. They would not attach themselves to local bishops or local authorities.
Needed men who are well equipped in theological knowledge and in Christian tradition, and inculcate and articulate these values to a broken society. And the right time, I think this congregation emerged. And certainly, and with their special vows, they take the special vows to the Holy Father, to the Pope. They are at his service for pastoral ministry, for intellectual activities, and for mission expansion. So they were at the forefront at the service of the Pope. And the Pope needed such a powerful group, deeply intellectual, at the same time contemplatives. And that is the typicality of their charism, contemplation in action, being in the world, always being in touch with God, as they call themselves friends of Jesus, at the same time fully involved with the world for the redeeming work of the church.
Because it was not easy. Whoever wanted to become a Jesuit could not become a Jesuit. There were many obstacles that he had to clear before he could be acknowledged as a Jesuit. And they had to master the humanities, philosophy, serve others humbly, and follow spiritual exercises, which was a series of graded exercises and meditation that were devised by Ignatius between 1520 and 1530 under the guidance of an experienced Jesuit spiritual director.
The Jesuits ministered to the poor, educated boys, and evangelized the heathen. The purpose of this international movement was to revive a universal Christianity.
Ignatius and his followers accepted the Christian humanist view of religion as internal and individual. It was something which had to be internalized. It was something that had to be felt by the individual himself. But the Jesuit also had to resign his will and intellect to the keeping of the general order and the Pope and serve him willingly. And the realization was there that religion is a personal premise. It has to be realized by the individual himself. But at the same time, they did not ignore or they did not deny the existence of the established order and the Pope. They subscribed to it. The new generation of the Catholic Reformation include both ideas and institution. Humanist bishops like Contarini and Sadoleto developed a new vision of what a bishop should be and do. Unlike his medieval predecessor, he should see himself as a spiritual ruler and not a royal administrator. Should live in his diocese, however remote or poor it was. In fact, Sadoleto was a parish priest of a very remote church, and see to it that his clergy was literate and competent to perform the basic church functions and services. The Jesuits didn't wear habits, nor did they eat coarse food, but that does not mean to say that the Jesuits followed a life of ease. In fact, they bore the same hardships as the monks and the friars. They went out into the world and preached and held services in areas which were very inhospitable, which did not accept them. In fact, in England and other Protestant countries, they were executed. In Japan, they were crucified. But yet, they preached there. They went there. Nothing could stop them from going and spreading their message.
Francis Xavier, a Spanish Jesuit, traveled to Goa, South India, Ceylon, Malaya, and Japan on his amazing missionary journeys. When Ignatius died, the society had 1,000 members administering 100 foundations. A century later, there were over 15,000 Jesuits and 550 foundations.
ম্যাম, এর আগে যখন ক্যাথলিক রিফর্মেশন হচ্ছে তখন চার্চ ব্যবস্থার মধ্যে একটা শ্রেণী চাইছে বা একটা দল চাইছে যে আমরা চার্চ ব্যবস্থার কিছু রিফর্ম করি, কিন্তু সবসময় তো একটা অর্থোডক্স বা একটা রক্ষণশীল গোষ্ঠী সেখানে আছে, তো তাদের কি কোনো রিয়াকশন আছে?
Where we are talking about the Orthodox elements, yes, the Pope, of course, or the established clergy, let's call it that way, not only the Pope, the established clergy, yes, they were reacting, but the realization also dawned, specifically with the rise of the Protestant movement, that something dramatically different has to be done to the Catholic Church to save it. So even when they were not always agreeable to the various reforms that were sought by the Christian Reformists, yet they did not put up a very strong protest against it, primarily because they realized that their existence itself would be jeopardized because of the onslaught of the Catholic Reformation. And this, in continuation of what you just said or you asked, I think this will answer your question better. When we say that the next step was the Counter-Reformation, where we find that very conscious steps were being taken to actually ward off the menace that the Protestant Reformation movement was envisaged by these Catholics. The way they saw the Protestant Reformation movement, it was a menace to their existence, and how they tried to curb the advances of this group of people. And that is why we find that the Counter-Reformation was at time very violent, where force was being used to curtail the Protestant Reformation.
The Roman Inquisition was established in 1542 by Pope Paul III to suppress Lutheranism in Italy. Cardinal Caraffa, its Inquisitor General, directed that heretics in high places should be dealt with most severely.
There was, in fact, a large cross-section of people who wanted to remain within the Catholic fold and thought that Reformation was actually a menace to the existing church. And in fact, they found it, just as Luther found the papal Christianity anti-Christian, they must have found Luther's movement anti-Christ and anti-Christian. Because it's all about perception, the way we perceive religion. There is no last word in it that this is correct, because it's all my assumption and what I feel about religion. The various institutions of Catholicism, the institutions, what is called the sacerdotal and the sacramental religion, that at least was very palpable. You know, people could sort of touch it and see, and if you wanted redemption, you could at least go to the parish priest and ask for forgiveness, where you could confess. So that at least, you know, took away certain loads from you. Whereas, where it's just justification by faith, it's something which is not palpable actually, where sometimes you feel that no matter what I do, I won't be salvaged.
The other development of the Catholic Reformation was the formation of the Council of Trent. The corrupt hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church was dramatically reformed in the wake of the Council of Trent. Between 1545 and 1563, the Council held 3 sessions and modified and unified church doctrine. It abolished corrupt practices, purged the church, and clarified issues like faith, good work, and salvation. The council gave final authority to the Pope.
In 1542, the Pope established the Roman Inquisition, which hunted down Italian reformers and so-called heretics. Libraries were purged of offending titles. Booksellers were punished for purveying heretical and anonymous texts, and all books published in Catholic countries were subjected to censorship.
The Counter-Reformation also took aggressive and somewhat hostile measures against the followers of Luther and Calvin. The Inquisition, founded in the 13th century, expanded its activities, and heretics were subjected to torture and punishment. All compromise between Protestant and Catholic was rejected.
Powerful preaching, suppression of opposing views, and the dreadful threat of death by fire. Those who would not abide by the dictates of the established church would be burned to death. So these dreadful threats gradually rid Italy, Spain, and Catholic Bavaria of the dissenting views and non-standard practices. By the early 17th century, the chill that paralyzes independent thought and speech became a hallmark of Catholic Europe. You felt scared to say anything. Imagination of the philosophers were let loose by the geographical discoveries and the discovery of the New World, and the new astronomy of Copernicus found that they must abase themselves before the inquisitors or wind up. The suppression of Galileo's work was only the last act of a drama that began in the 1530s. This was how you were trying to forcefully, suffocate or gag the voice of dissent. Or it's not only dissent. If someone said something which was different, you either gagged that person or you forcefully eradicated that menace from society. In many cases, the humanist spirit of the Catholic Reformation and the Counter-Reformation project of defending the church proved compatible. It's not always that the Counter-Reformation is not to be visualized as a monster, actually. There were, areas where the Catholic Reformation and the Counter-Reformation merged together and worked in tandem to protect the fabric of the church. The church desperately needed preachers who would bolster up the reliability of the clergy and the laity, convert Protestants, and reach the people of Asia and America, the New World. The most important and interesting development of the 16th century Catholicism was neither a reform of abuses within the church nor the church's successful effort to stem the tide of Protestantism. It was the emergence during these decades before the end of the Council of Trent, before the end decades of the Council of Trent, of the doctrine and style of piety with which we associate Catholicism today. During the age of the Reformation, we find that Protestantism and Catholicism crystallized into two distinct and opposed systems, each more exclusive, more consistent, and more rigid than the medieval theological tradition from which they were derived. Two very, very watertight compartments. By the end of the 16th century, you have two distinct Christian groups in Europe. One is the Catholics, the other the Protestant.
The Reformation had split Europe, and the repair of the split was just not to be. But now the believer had a choice to follow Luther or Calvin or Zwingli or Ignatius Loyola or any other visionary. Each one of them had his own way of looking at Christianity. And the paths shown by all of them led to the same destination.
So, the Reformation asked questions, they asked questioned the legitimacy of the established church. And the leaders of the Reformation tried to visualize or tried to propagate a religion which they envisioned as the true religion, the correct religion. Eventually, we have the Counter-Reformation, which tries to stall the inroads made by Protestantism into England. And they use various weapons to do it. At times there was a violent clash between the Protestants and the Catholics. At times they tried to spread the purged Catholicism among the various believers. But all in all, because of this movement, which is known as the Reformation in Europe, we find a distinct division in Christendom. There was a Catholic Church and various categories of Protestant churches. Not only that, various sects, dissenting sects came into being in Europe.